Altruism and Cooperation. Wonder Woman was originally published as a comic book in 1941, the creation of Harvard psychologist William Marston. It took 76 years for Wonder Woman to make it to the silver screen, and the results were groundbreaking. The film featured a female superhero, a rarity in film. Wonder Woman was preceded by 6 Superman movies and 8 Batman movies. Further, it was directed by a woman, Patty Jenkins. During a time when only 7% of Hollywood directors were women, the film was praised by reviewers and fans alike and made over $700 million at the box office worldwide. Wonder Woman tells the story of Diana, princess of the Amazons, raised on the Greek-like island Themyscira. As a young girl, Diana is inspired by the female warriors on the island and persuades her protective mother, Queen Hippolyta, to let her train to become a warrior. Through physical prowess and force of will, she becomes the greatest of warriors and is soon put to the test. When an American pilot crashes his plane into the sea off her island, she rescues him and shortly thereafter fights German soldiers who have landed in pursuit. Upon hearing of the Great War in Europe, World War I, she travels there to save innocent lives, knowing that an encounter with her arch-nemesis, Ares the god of war, awaits. With her signature protective bracelets and magic lasso, Wonder Woman takes down 4 German spies in a London alley, fearlessly charges through bullets and German soldiers in intense battle, and, in the climax of the film, destroys Ares. Each heroic act is inspired by strong protective feelings and a faith in the good of people. The message couldn't be clearer. When it comes to courage and physical heroism, women are just as capable as men, a message Marston hoped would inspire young girls and women in their pursuit of equality. Outline: altruism, cooperation. For all that's unique about the film, Wonder Woman also touches on deep truths about altruism that you'll learn about in this chapter. First, we have strong emotions, empathic concern or sympathy, that drive us to acts of altruism. Throughout the film, Wonder Woman is moved to help out of the sacred duty to defend others and to give. Second, altruism isn't blind. It's more likely to be directed towards some people than others. In the film, Wonder Woman has particularly powerful emotional responses to young children, mothers, the injured, and the vulnerable. Third, in spite of strong inclinations to help those in need, there are often powerful situational constraints upon altruistic action. In the film, it's Wonder Woman's own mother who tries to prevent her from pursuing the life of a warrior. Sexist beliefs and the conventions of the era, depicted in the film, conspire to try to constrain Wonder Woman's heroic tendencies, but fail to do so. Finally, altruism is something that can be cultivated. It's shaped by culture. In the film, Wonder Woman is raised in a culture in which courage and sacrifice are taught as the default orientation to living in the world. Humans have long created stories, myths, legends, and religious fables depicting and promoting altruism, courage, and heroism. Wonder Woman is yet another example of a story that highlights such nobler human tendencies. Let's turn to social psychology's own story about altruism and its close relative, cooperation. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was a groundbreaking film in its portrayal of the altruism of a female superhero. So you can see Wonder Woman holding her shield, running through a war-torn area. Altruism. Wonder Woman's acts of courage and kindness occur in combat and war when her life is truly on the line. Such acts of altruism during war are strikingly common. Even during the unspeakable violence of the Rwandan genocide, discussed in Chapter 13, individuals engaged in inspiring acts of concern for others. For example, Paul Rusesabagina, a Hutu, was the acting manager of the Mille Collines, the most prestigious hotel in the capital city of Kigali. As the massacres unfolded, he hid over 1,000 people, both Tutsis and moderate Hutus, at the hotel. Each day, the Hutu Interahamwe militia would arrive and demand to take some of the Tutsis away, and each day Rusesabagina would plead and ply them with beer and money to prevent further massacres. Around the clock, he frantically called and faxed influential contacts, appealing for their help. Often risking his own life and those of his children and wife, he pleaded and schemed tirelessly for the survival of his guests. Rusesabagina's actions are clear examples of altruism, pro-social behavior that benefits others without regard to consequences for oneself. Altruistic acts arise out of feelings of compassion that lead us to behave in ways that benefit others who are suffering, often at a cost to ourselves. At the same time, although most of us experience such pro-social feelings as compassion, we don't always act on them. Many forces can inhibit altruistic action, including basic tendencies toward self-preservation and fear of embarrassment. For example, if we were to misinterpret a mundane situation as an emergency, when do we act altruistically and when don't we? Altruism in Rwanda. Paul Rusesabagina, acting manager of the Mille Collines Hotel in Kigali, Rwanda, saved over 1,000 people from massacre by sheltering them at the hotel, bribing the local militia, and appealing to influential contacts. Altruism. Pro-social behavior that benefits others without regard to consequences for oneself. Sympathy will have increased through natural selection. For those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. Charles Darwin, The Descent of Man, 1871. Empathic concern, a case of pure altruism. Daniel Batson has made a persuasive case for a selfless, other-oriented state that motivates altruistic behavior, like that which inspires Wonder Woman's heroics or was displayed during the Rwanda genocide by Rusesabagina. Batson begins by proposing that in any altruistic action, several motives are likely to be in play. Two of these motives are essentially selfish, egoistic. A third is more purely oriented toward unselfishly benefiting another person. The first selfish motive is social reward, being esteemed and valued by others in the form of praise, an award, or recognition in the mass media or social media. Those motivated by social rewards act altruistically to enjoy the positive regard of others. For example, one study found that when prompted to think about enjoying the respect of others, people were more likely to choose environmentally friendly consumer products, efficient dishwashers and cars, over equivalently priced but more desirable luxury products. Our desire for the rewards of being respected leads us to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good of the environment. Recent neuroscientific studies find that being esteemed by others activates circuits in the brain associated with rewards and personal safety. In fact, social rewards can be so powerful that they can trigger arms races of altruism, referred to as competitive altruism. People will try to outdo one another in their altruistic acts, all in the service of being the most highly esteemed. For example, in many hunter-gatherer cultures, it's the individual who gives away the most food, seal meat among the Inuit of Alaska, yams in hunter-gatherer tribes in New Guinea, who enjoys the greatest status. In laboratory studies, group members will give greater social status to other group members who act altruistically. Social rewards are a powerful motive for altruism, but an egoistic one. A second selfish motive for helping is personal distress. People are motivated to help people in need in order to reduce their own distress. Cialdini and Fultz, 1990. Responding with personal distress and encountering others' suffering begins very early in life. In one study, for instance, newborn infants heard a tape recording of their own crying, the crying of another day-old, or the crying of an 11-month-old. 1982. The newborns cried the most in response to the cries of another newborn. Later in life, too, when we see someone crying, experiencing physical pain, or stuck in an embarrassing situation, we usually experience our own feelings of personal distress. Neuroscientific studies find that when we watch someone else experience pain, the pain regions of our own brain are activated. 2012. The resulting feelings lead us to act in ways that return us to a more peaceful state. The most direct way to alleviate our own personal distress in these instances is to reduce the distress of the other person, and helping behavior is one way to do it. The third motive is empathic concern, the feeling people experience when identifying with someone in need, accompanied by the intention to enhance the other person's welfare. When we encounter somebody else in need or in pain, we not only experience our own feelings of distress, but also imagine what that person must be experiencing. Taking the other's perspective in this way results in an empathic state of concern, or what we might call sympathy or compassion, which motivates us to help that person address his or her needs and thus enhance that person's welfare, even at our own expense. According to Batson, this experience of empathic concern is fast and intuitive and produces selfless or other-oriented altruism. It's the split-second feeling of empathy that caused Rusesabagina to risk his life and the lives of his family to help the Tutsis. One recent study examined the reasons extreme altruists gave for why they risked their own lives to save others. Most typically, they explained their life-imperiling acts of altruism by referring to an automatic, emotion-like impulse to help others. Extraordinary altruism. New York City ballet dancer Gray Davis jumped on the New York subway tracks to save a fallen man in the face of an oncoming train. He is pictured here A, in his headshot for the American Ballet Theater, and B, being recognized for his bravery. Social reward. A benefit such as praise, positive attention, something tangible, or gratitude that may be gained from helping others and thus serves as a motive for altruistic behavior. Heroic altruism. During the riots in Los Angeles in 1992, Reginald Denny was pulled from his truck and severely beaten. Bobby Green, pictured here, and several other local residents rushed to the scene to rescue Danny. Personal distress. A motive for helping others in distress that may arise from a need to reduce one's own distress. Empathic concern. Identifying with someone in need, including feeling and understanding what that person is experiencing, accompanied by the intention to help the person. Kindness is not an illusion, and violence is not a rule. The true resting state of human affairs is not represented by a man hacking his neighbor into pieces with a machete. That is a sick aberration. No, the true state of human affairs is life as it ought to be lived. Paul Rusesabagina, An Ordinary Man, an Autobiography. A closer look. How selfish are we? One of the most widespread assumptions in Western thought is that humans are fundamentally selfish, motivated to achieve their own desires, even to the point of dishonesty, theft, and violence. For Sigmund Freud, our actions are motivated by the pleasure principle. We do things that maximize personal pleasure. Niccolo Machiavelli characterized the human race as fickle, hypocritical, and greedy of gain. Are we hardwired by evolution to maximize our own interests, even to the point of harming others? What does social psychology have to say? Something much different. It feels good to give. In experiments where subjects decide how much of a payment to give to another subject, 71% of people give between 40 and 50% of their resources. People give 39% even though they can give as little as 1%. When asked to decide quickly how much to give to a group they are working with, people give 65% of their resource. When asked to deliberate over the decision, they give 50%. Nearly 70% of 14-month-olds will spontaneously assist an experimenter trying to pick up a pen. When people give money, the reward circuit of the brain is activated to the same degree as when they receive money. Trust and economic growth. If we assume other people are essentially altruistic and will treat us fairly, we are more likely to cooperate and be generous with our time and resources, and this behavior is likely to benefit our community as a whole. In fact, one study found a strong link between trust and income growth in nations around the world. Okay, so this is a scatter plot. On the x-axis is trust from -30 to 30, and on the y-axis is per capita income growth from -4 to 6. So you can see a linear correlation, a positive linear correlation between trust and per capita income growth. Norway's at the top of this pattern, and Sweden and Greece are very close. Canada is about in the middle, and in the US there is less trust and there's less per capita income growth than in Canada and the other places. And Brazil is near the bottom on this graph with not very much trust and then not very much per capita income growth. Empathy among newborns. When newborn babies hear another newborn cry, they feel the distress of the other baby and will also begin to cry. as seen in this photo of infants in a hospital nursery. Empathy versus personal distress. Now comes the tricky part. How can researchers document that altruistic action can be motivated by empathic concern alone, independent of the egoistic motive of desiring social rewards or reducing personal distress? To do so, Daniel Batson and his colleagues have carried out studies in which participants encounter another person in distress for whom they feel empathic concern, 1991. At the same time, egoistic motives are manipulated to make helping behavior less likely. In the experiment, there may be no social rewards for helping, or participants might have the opportunity to reduce their personal distress without helping. If participants still help in these circumstances, it's highly likely that there's an empathy-based form of helping that's not selfishly motivated. An initial study pitted empathic concern against the selfish motive of reducing personal distress by allowing participants to simply leave the experiment, 1983. Participants were told they'd interact with another participant of the same sex, actually a confederate of the experiment, who would complete several trials of a digit recall task and receive a shock after each mistake. In the easy escape condition, the participant had to watch the confederate receive only 2 of the 10 shocks and was then free to leave the experiment while the confederate finished the study. In the difficult-to-escape condition, the participant was told it would be necessary to watch the other person take all 10 shocks. After the first 2 trials, the confederate, made up to look a little pale, asked for a glass of water, mentioned feelings of discomfort, and recounted a traumatic shock experience from childhood. At this point, participants reported on their current feelings, which were used to divide participants into those who were feeling egoistic distress and those who were feeling empathic concern. The experimenter then asked if the participant would be willing to take some of the confederate's shocks. If there is such a thing as altruism based on empathic concern alone, the researchers reasoned, then they should see substantial levels of altruism, agreeing to sit in for the confederate on the part of participants who felt empathic concern for the confederate, even when they had the option to simply leave the experiment to escape their distress. In keeping with this reasoning, those participants who mostly felt egoistic distress and could escape the situation took few shocks on behalf of the confederate. Those participants who felt empathic concern, however, volunteered to take more shocks, even when they could leave the study. Those still skeptical about the possibility of pure altruism based on empathic concern might have a few reservations about this first study. First of all, empathic concern wasn't manipulated. Instead, empathic participants were identified according to their self-reports. Perhaps there was a selection bias in this study, that is, the high empathy participants might just be more helpful in general for reasons other than a selfless response to the confederate in need. Second, the experimenter would know how the participant acted, so a social rewards account of this study can't be ruled out. Perhaps participants who took more shocks on behalf of the confederate hoped to impress the experimenter or wanted to avoid embarrassing themselves by leaving a person in obvious need. It'd be much more telling to show that there are substantial rates of helping when doing so is completely anonymous. That notion motivated Batson's next study. Altruism in animals. Taking care of others is seen in many non-human species, such as these elephants helping a younger elephant. Oh, there's adult elephants helping a younger elephant up out of the mud. Anonymous altruism. In this study, Batson and his colleagues had female participants interact with another person, a communicator, seated in another cubicle. 1986, the communicator, a student confederate who called herself Janet Arnold, wrote 2 honest and somewhat confessional notes to the participant. The task of the listener, the actual participant, was to form as accurate an impression of Janet as possible. This time, empathic concern was manipulated. In the low empathy condition, the participant was told to be as objective as possible when reading the notes, to concentrate on the facts at hand. In the high empathy condition, the participant was told to imagine as vividly as possible how Janet felt. In the first note to the participant, Janet confessed to feeling out of place at her new home at the university. In the second note, Janet expressed a strong need for a friend and asked the participant if she'd like to hang out a bit. After receiving the second note, the participant was told that Janet had finished and left the study. The experimenter then gave the participant a form that described another long-term relationship study and asked whether the participant would like to spend time at some later date with Janet Arnold. In the low social evaluation condition, Janet's notes were delivered in sealed envelopes, and the experimenter didn't read them. Similarly, the participant indicated how much time she would spend with Janet on a form enclosed in a sealed envelope to be sent to the professor conducting the study, who was never to meet the participant. Neither the experimenter nor Janet would know of the participant's response. In contrast, in the high social evaluation condition, both the experimenter and the participant read Janet's notes, and Janet and the experimenter would know how much time the participant said she would be willing to spend with Janet. The critical dependent measure was the number of hours the participant volunteered to spend with Janet. As figure 14.1 shows, participants in the high empathy condition volunteered to spend more time with her, even when no one would know of their action. Figure 14.1, Empathy and Altruism. This study showed that when participants empathize with someone who is in need, they engage in more altruistic action, even when their sacrifice is anonymous. So it's a side-by-side bar graph. The first category is low social evaluation, and the other category is high social evaluation. The y-axis is hours participant would spend with Janet from 0 to 3 hours, and the two sets of bars are low empathy and high empathy. So you can see in the low social evaluation condition, when they were in the low empathy condition, they would spend about 1.4 hours with Janet, but when they have high empathy, they would spend 2.5 hours with Janet, so almost twice as many hours, even though no one knows that they're going to do it, so there's no social reward. And in the high social evaluation condition, when they have low empathy, they will spend about 0.7 hours with Janet, but when they have high empathy, they'll spend about 1.8 hours with Janet, which is, again, twice more when they have high empathy, and they will also be given social rewards for doing it. But actually, they're going to spend the most time with Janet, 2.5 hours, when they're not being socially evaluated, in fact, and only 1.8 when they will be socially evaluated. So it does seem like they just want to spend with Janet because empathy primed them to be kind to her. I have showed you all things, how that so laboring ye ought to support the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Acts 20:35. Empathic concern and volunteerism. Batson's research shows that feelings of empathic concern and sympathy increase the likelihood that people will act altruistically, helping those who suffer. These feelings are also a primary determinant of other prosocial behaviors. For example, Alan Omoto and Mark Snyder have studied volunteerism, which they define as non-monetary assistance, when people help out with no expectation of receiving any compensation. In the United States, estimates indicate that close to 30% of the population volunteer in some way, whether providing companionship to older adults, mentoring troubled children, feeding those in poverty, teaching classes in prison, or assisting the sick and dying. 2009. As with altruism, volunteerism has many motives, including a desire for social rewards and a desire to reduce personal distress. But Omoto and his colleagues have found that self-reports of feelings of empathic concern also predict the likelihood that an individual will engage in volunteerism. In fact, people will undergo a great deal of suffering to contribute in charitable ways when such acts provide them with a sense of purpose. Volunteerism. Assistance a person regularly provides to another person or group with no expectation of compensation. Recent evidence suggests that volunteering is good for your health. Stephanie Brown and her colleagues studied 423 elderly married couples over the course of 5 years and found that volunteerism increases longevity. 2003. At the beginning of the study, the participants reported on how often they offered help to other people by doing errands, shopping, or providing childcare for neighbors. To capture how much participants were themselves the beneficiaries of volunteerism, they also indicated how often they received this kind of help from other people than their spouses. Following the participants over the course of 5 years, the researchers kept track of who died. 145 of them did during the study. Remarkably, people who gave more to others were less likely to die during the 5 years of the study, when controlling for the participants' initial health, gender, and social contacts. And how about the recipients of help? They were no less likely to die than people who didn't receive help. So they were just as likely to die as if they didn't receive help. It may indeed be better to give than to receive. But what cultivates empathic concern in people? What produces the Paul Rusesabagins of the world, or the good-hearted citizens who make sacrifices and volunteer? One answer comes from the remarkable work of the Alleners, who interviewed over 100 rescuers from World War II, individuals who risked their lives to save Jews during the Nazi Holocaust. Samuel Allener himself was saved by such a person in Poland as a young boy. In the course of these interviews, rescuers reported that altruism and compassion were highly valued in their homes. Rescuers reported that their parents and grandparents frequently told stories from their own lives and from their culture in which altruism was a theme. Altruism was also a central theme in the books the family read and the teachings they discussed. In their dinner-time conversations about the happenings of the day, they discussed events through the lens of altruism and concern for other people. Altruism was explicitly invoked as an important ethical principle. Empathic concern apparently is a powerful force for good in human societies and can be passed from parents to children. Volunteering and better health. Volunteering, such as serving food to the homeless in soup kitchens, can contribute to improving the volunteer's health. Box 14.1. Focus on human nature. Are we wired to care and share? Batson's studies of empathic concern were some of the first to document with scientific precision that humans may act altruistically, guided by a more selfless motivational state, in his terminology, empathic concern. Since this important line of research, social psychologists have made several discoveries that further suggest that we are wired to care and share. One kind of evidence comes from our primate relatives. If empathic concern is a basic motive for human action, then we might expect other primates to show rudimentary forms of altruistic behavior. Indeed, observations of chimpanzees and bonobos find that they do occasionally provide care to those in need, such as fellow primates who have lost their eyesight or who are crippled. They also regularly share food with non-kin in their community, a basic form of altruistic action. If a selfless form of altruism is part of our evolutionary heritage, we might also expect to observe it in young children, much as children reliably show other species-defining tendencies, such as the fear of strangers and the ability to learn language. Work by Felix Wernicken and Michael Tomasello provides impressive evidence of the altruistic tendencies of young children, 2006. In this research, 18-month-olds, so they're 1.5, encountered adults in need. For example, in one situation, the toddler saw an adult drop a pen and attempt unsuccessfully to pick it up from the floor. In another situation, the toddler saw an adult try to open closed doors of a cabinet, again unsuccessfully. In each situation, the toddler could readily offer assistance. In the control conditions, the 18-month-olds encountered the same stimuli, a dropped pen or doors that couldn't be opened, but the adult nearby did not express any need for help. Impressively, across these types of situations, 40 to 60% of the children helped the adult strangers in need, but they did not engage in the helpful actions in the control conditions. These findings suggest that beginning quite early in development, children will respond altruistically to others in need, thus providing still more evidence that we are wired to care and share. A third kind of evidence in support of the claim that we're wired to be altruistic comes from the study of neurophysiology. That is, are there regions in our nervous system that enable us to act altruistically, much as the human stress response supports fight or flight behavior? Indeed, increasingly the case can be made for the prosocial nervous system, 2014. When we feel compassion and are inclined to act altruistically, a distinct part of the frontal lobes is activated. The vagus nerve is the largest bundle of nerves in the human nervous system. It wanders from the brainstem at the top of the spinal cord to muscles in the throat, through the lungs and heart, causing deeper breathing and heart rate deceleration, and eventually to the digestive organs and immune system. When the vagus nerve is activated, it enables vocal communication, eye contact, and the slowing of the stress response, and is thus thought to be an ancient physiological system that promotes social connection. Recent empirical studies find that it's engaged during feelings of empathic concern or compassion and acts of altruism.